Hello, Sudoku friends, and welcome to a medium difficulty level puzzle from sudokuexchange.com. I chose this one because it doesn't have a lot of givens, and we might see some challenges with this one, but I'm not sure yet. We will just have to wait and see. The first thing that occurs to me is that these fours block down and a 4 blocks over, so a 4 must go in this square here. I can also see a 6 blocking over and a 6 blocking over. Now I know that one of these must be a 6. This 4 blocks across here. Therefore, one of these 3 squares has got to be a 4. And they will block these squares along with this 4 blocking these squares. And the 4 down here blocks this square. And that is how we find the 4 for the top row. This 4 blocks across here, so we know that one of these squares must be a 4, and they will block across here. This 4 blocks across here. We got what 2 4s blocking up and down like so. So a 4 must go here. This 5 blocks across, so a 5 must go either here or here because the 5 blocks down here, right? So a 5 here or here blocks these squares. This 5 blocks these squares. This 5 blocks this square. Ergo, a 5 goes into this square like so. We got 8 blocking across and another 8 blocking across. So here's a free 8 for us. This 8 now blocks down and this 8 blocks over. So one of these must be an 8. And therefore one of these 2 squares must be an 8. Here's a little pattern that very often occurs. Look at the 1 6 here and look at the 1 6 here. They force a 1 and a 6 to go into these 2 squares. We don't know exactly where, but we now know that we only have to look at these other 5 squares to find a digit. For example, the 3 blocks across here, so one of these squares must be a 3. And while I'm speaking of the 3s, I'm noticing the 3 blocking over here and the 3 blocking up here. So one of these squares must be a 3, and they block here. This 3 blocks here. So the only available square in this box, number 2, for a 3 is here. And that gives us a 3 for this square, doesn't it? Because a 3 blocks over here, this 3 blocks down here, and we just discussed how these 2 squares must be a 1 and a 6. Again, only one square available for a 3 in this box. Let's have a look at the 7 here. It blocks over like so, and this 7 blocks up like so. And we immediately now look up and we look at these 2 7s blocking like so, and this 7 blocking across, giving us a 7 for the first column. What I like to do next is focus on these 2 squares here, because I know that these 3 squares must be a 1, 2, and a 6. While I'm discussing this with myself, I'm already looking at these 2 6s blocking up here. So I know that this is a 6, and these must be a 1 and a 2. And that makes these a 9 and a 5. That is not immediately helpful, but it's something that I will keep in mind. And while I can't really progress with these 4 squares, I'm now turning my attention to these 2 squares because I know that they must be a 2 and a 9. Again, I can't place either of those digits, but I know that I don't have to look for anything but a 2 and a 9 for these 2 squares. So I can now look at these squares here and see if I can figure out what they must be. And while I'm thinking about that, I'm looking at the 3 that is blocking up here, the 3 that is blocking down here, the 3 is blocking over here, and the 3 is blocking across here. So a 3 must go in this square. the 3 and the 4 here and the 3 and the 4 here are catching my eye. So I know that the 3 and the 4 must be among these three squares here. Likewise, I know that these two squares must be a 5 and a 9. We have a 5 and a 9 here, so a 5 and a 9 must go in two of these three squares. And since we do have a 5 blocking up and another 5 blocking up, we know that the 5 goes to this square and the 9 must go in one of these squares here. We have these two 6s blocking these 4 squares. So it is quite clear that this square must be a 6. And remember how we said that a 3 and a 4 must go up here somewhere in these three squares. Now we know that a 3 that is blocking up here and the 3 blocks over here must go here and the 4 here. These two now must be a 1 and a 7. We got a 1 blocking up, so a 1 will have to go here and the 7 is forced into this square. These two now must be a 9 and a 6. And these two must be a 2 and a 1. That gives us a 1 actually for one of these two squares, because one of these must be a 1, and we already know that one of these must be a 1. So a 1 for the center column has got to go either here or here. And that in turn tells us that one of these two squares must be a 1. And we already know that the other square must be an 8 because this 8 blocks down and this 8 blocks across. So these two squares have to be a 1 and an 8. This now must be a 2 or a 9, and this must be a 2 or a 9. And this, by the way, also must be a 2 or a 9. So these three squares must be 2 or a 9, and we can add this square as well. Let's continue for a moment with the ones. This 1 blocks up, this blocks down, this square therefore must be a 1. We know that these three squares must be a 3, 4, and a 5. We got a 4 blocking across here and a 4 blocking across here. So the 4 must go in the corner like so. This 3 blocks across, so this must therefore be the 5, and the 3 is forced into this square. We can find an 8 for one of these three squares because the 8 here blocks this square. The 8 here blocks this square. Therefore, an 8 must go here. And these two now must be a 2 and a 9. We seem to have a lot of a 2 and a 9s issues with this grid, but since this cannot be a 7 and this cannot be a 7 due to the 7 blocking down, we know that this is a 7. And these now must both be a 2 and a 9, making these a 4 and a 5. We do have a 5 in the row, so the 4 goes here and the 5 goes here. These two now must be a 2 and a 9. Again, we can't do anything about that, but we can begin to think a little bit about this row here, which needs a 1, 2, 9, and a 6. So a 6 must go here or here. And that's all we can say, isn't it? That's interesting.
That's interesting.
But as we discussed a moment ago, 1 needs to go in one of these two squares here, because the 1 blocks here, right? And these two could be 1s, and therefore these two can't be 1s. Now we have a 1 blocking across here, so this square must be a 1. And since this 6 blocks here and this 6 blocks here, we know that a 6 must go here. And we do remember, don't we, that these two squares have to be a 1 and a 6. Now that we found this 6, we know that this square must be the 1 and the 6 goes here. This 6 blocks up, and so does this, making this a 6. And this last square has got to be a 9. So with the 9 blocking down here, and we know that these have to be a 1 and an 8, we don't have to analyze that again, by the way, because we remember that these have to be a 1 and 8 because we talked about it at length.
We talked about this.
So these being 1, 8, and this not being a 9, we know now that this must be a 9, and this last square here must be the 2. And that solves the puzzle of the 2 and the 9 here, doesn't it? Now this is a 9 and this is a 2. The 9 blocks across here, making this a 9. The 9 blocks up, the 9 blocks over, 9 goes here. And we do remember that this square here had got to be a 5, don't we? And even if we don't remember, we can see the 5 blocking over here. So the 5 must go here. These two are still a 1 and a 2. These two must be an 8 now and a 5. We got a 5 in the column. So the 8 must go here and the 5 here. And that solves the 1-8 pair we had here, because the 8 now blocks up, making this a 1 and this an 8. This must be a 2. And therefore, this, of course, must be a 2 as well. And this must be a 9. This last square is also a 2, making this a 2. And this, I believe, is a, yes, it's a 1. We got a 2 blocking down here and another 2 blocking down and 1 blocking over. So this is a 2. The last square here can only be a 9. And that 9 blocks up, this blocks down. This is therefore a 9. These must be a 7 and an 8. We got a 7 blocking down. 8 therefore goes here and 7 here, making this a 7 and making this an 8. We found the 1 and an 8 here, so now we know that this square cannot be a 1. And this square therefore must be a 2. Granted, this was not a very complicated puzzle.
I guess it wasn't too complicated.
But I think I have demonstrated how you can go about solving any puzzle, or at least most of any puzzle, using no notation, just by thinking logically about what can go where. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.